Hello, everyone, and welcome to this third session of our two-day event on how institutions and governments can support students' 21st century skills. Thank you very much for joining us from wherever you are in the world. My name is Cassie Haig, and I'm an analyst at the Centre for Educational Research and Innovation, or CERI, at the OECD. And this two-day event is part of the CERI project on fostering and assessing creativity and critical thinking. So that's a project that works with higher education institutions to facilitate innovation in teaching and learning, with the aim of fostering students' creativity and critical thinking really as an integral part of their subject learning. So as part of the project, we also explore how these skills and other 21st century skills can be supported on a policy level at both the institutional and the national level. So to that end, we already had two great events yesterday, which I hope some of you perhaps had the chance to attend. In the first session, we heard the perspectives of institutions from Finland, Singapore, and Canada about what they do to foster 21st century skills and what could support them in that. And then in the second session, we focused more on the sort of governmental public policy level, and we heard a little bit about quality assurance, funding, professional learning, and how they can be used to incentivize enhancements in teaching and learning. So today we're talking about perspectives from the Asia Pacific, and we're again concentrating on that broader policy level rather than individual institutions. And we're really delighted to be joined by an expert panel. We're very fortunate to start with a presentation, well, possibly start with a presentation from Dr. In-Young Kim, who is the Director and Research Fellow at the Office of International Cooperation of the Korean Educational Development Institute, and she's going to be talking about governmental initiatives from Korea, and she will be joining us shortly. And we're equally pleased to have a presentation from Professor Angela Carbone, who's the Director of the Australian Awards for University Teaching at Universities Australia. And she's going to be talking about an initiative which I believe began as a government initiative and is now supported and run by Universities Australia, which is the National Association of Universities in Australia. And then we're also very privileged to be joined by Professor Akiyoshi Yonezawa, who's the Vice Director of the International Strategy Office at Tohoku University in Japan. And he is going to be acting as a discussant to share his expertise and some reflections on what's been said and how that relates to the broader context. So in terms of how we're going to run the webinar, we'll first hear the presentations and each speaker will talk for around 15 minutes. And then Aki will comment on each in turn for around 5 minutes or so. And then we hope to have a good kind of 30-35 minutes for questions and answers. So please do post your questions in the chat function so that we can also hear from you, the audience, and hopefully we can get some exchange and discussion going. So I'm going to stop there. And I think, in fact, we will start with Angela today. So let me stop speaking and let me pass the floor over to Angela. Angela, thank you for being here and please go ahead.
Thank you, Cassie, especially for the invitation, and it's good to see all the participants joining in the chat. I can see people joining in from all over the world, so it's really good to see. And I will now share my presentation if that's okay. So I will share my screen. All right. So I'm hoping everyone can see that screen. Cassie, can you see my screen? Fantastic. Thank you so much. So today I'm going to be talking about how the Australian government has supported creativity and innovation in teaching, which in turn supports the 21st century skills we want to develop in our students. So the title of my presentation is the Australian Awards for University Teaching, Recognising Educational Excellence and Innovation. All right, so moving through the slides. Before we start any presentation in Australia, in the higher education institution, we always acknowledge our First Nations people. So on behalf of those present here in this presentation, I would like to acknowledge the people of the Wurrung and the Boorong language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. I pay my respects to their ancestors, elders, past and present. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I hope to give you a bit of background of the Australian Awards for University Teaching, why these awards were introduced, give you a bit of an overview of the award categories, the criteria and the assessment process, and then move into the 21st century skills we want to develop in our students, because really, if we know what sorts of skills we want to develop in our students, then we can set the awards assessment criteria to assess academics to develop those skills. So that puts that at front of mind to the academics. And perhaps go through just a couple of examples of some brilliant educators that won that have been recipients of these awards. And then talk a little bit about the government initiatives going forward. Okay, so starting off, the award started in 1997, funded by the Australian government up until last year. And up until 2018, the awards were administered by a government department, and there was a number of government departments. Every time the government changes, they shut down the awards and then they reopen it, give it a different name and decide on the funding based on the budget that they've got. So we've gone through a number of bodies or departments that go through administering the awards. And this is as I said, every 3 to 5 years, you'll see a change. From 2018 to 2021, the Australian government funded Universities Australia to manage the awards. And then Universities Australia commissioned me to actually run the awards, and I'll tell you why they possibly commissioned me. As I said, from 2022, which is this year, there'll be no more government funding. So Universities Australia are looking at ways to source funding to keep the awards alive, because there's lots of benefits in having these awards. For a full history, if you're interested in that, there's a URL there, AAUTN, which is the Australian Awarded University Teachers Network.org. If you go to that website, you can see like a lovely infographic there that gives you a timeline of the awards and who managed them and how they were run. But one of the reasons why I was probably given the opportunity to run the national awards on top of my normal role as Associate Deputy Vice Chancellor Learning and Teaching at RMIT University. So I do this just sort of, half a day a week, focusing on the awards. But I was actually the first female recognised nationally for teaching excellence, and that was in 1998 in the field of ICT, so information and computing technology. I also achieved the overall award for University Teacher of the Year. I've also received a number of citations, so they're a bit smaller than an award, but they still hold the recognition of an award. But the government also ran grants to support learning and teaching innovation and fellowships, and that would allow you to do a project for over a year or two to make changes across the Australian education sector. So I've been lucky to receive grants, fellowships, citations and teaching awards over my career. So when I put in a submission to actually run the awards for University Australia, they granted me that opportunity, and I've got a small team that work with me to run those awards, which I'll introduce in a moment. So the purpose of the awards is really to recognise and reward creativity and innovation, and it encourages academics and educators to experiment with their teaching, but also keep track of changes they make to their pedagogy and to the curricula, and look for how that makes improvements to students' learning and their engagement. We aim to build a culture of excellence in teaching quality in our Australian university, and we have got a very good reputation nationally, internationally, I should say. We have lots of international students coming to study in Australia. It also provides a platform for the recipients as a way that they can develop as an educator, also as an assessor and a mentor. We have a number of past award recipients that are acting as mentors for more junior staff as well. So this brings the experience back into their institution. And it's a way of building and creating networks with people on the sort of same page that are really interested in advancing learning and teaching and the scholarship of learning and teaching as well. So there was a real purpose for the awards, and they're still continuing to run without government funding, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. So from 2018 to 2021, I've got a small team working with me. I saw Jin connected today, so she's a participant. I'm not sure if Angeline is on, but if you are, I say hello to my team members who've done an amazing job in running these awards. So there's only 3 of us. We also use a system called Spark Plus to manage all the nominations in the assessment process. So just to give you a bit of a sense of the award categories, as I mentioned earlier, there's citations for outstanding contributions to student learning. And you can apply for a citation in a number of disciplines. So it could be in the natural or physical sciences, it could be in engineering, ICT, health, it could be in education, could be in the creative arts, or it could even be multidisciplinary. And then they select a particular category. Are they an early career teacher? Are they an Indigenous person and they're applying for an Indigenous category? Are they a staff member, or are they just a regular teacher? Now, prior to 2018, from 2018 onwards, we recognise teaching excellence in the citation categories just through a certificate. Prior to 2018, when the government was more flushed with funds, we actually had some money associated with that award. So $10,000, and we gave out a lot more awards, 130 citation awards. With the awards for teaching excellence, there's a number of criteria that you have to address, and I'll mention that in the next slide. Again, you choose your discipline in which you're teaching in, and you choose whether you're an early career teacher or whether you're an Indigenous person or whether you're none of those. So from 2018 onwards, there were 9 categories. Each were awarded $15,000. And we also have an overall winner. So out of all those categories, we look at the quality of the submissions and we choose one overall winner, and that overall winner will get an extra $30,000. Pre-2018, if you were awarded a Teaching Excellence Award, you got $25,000 and then an extra $50,000 if you were the overall winner. So you can see the funding has been reduced quite considerably in citations and also teaching awards. And then we have awards for programs. So this is a program that you might develop that goes across a number of courses or units, depending on the language that you use in your institution, or it could be a program across the whole university. So we look at, initiatives that influence a large number of students across multiple disciplines. And in 2018 onwards, we gave out 4 program awards, $15,000 each. Pre-2018, there were 12 awards, $25,000. And what we've seen over the years is the government funding being reduced. And now with the pandemic, the funding is going really to support the health sector. So we can see the government, taking funds away from in recognition of teaching excellence. As I mentioned before, the teaching award criteria. So if you go for a teaching award, you have to address 4 criteria. The first one is around your approaches to teaching and how you support student learning. How do you motivate those students and how do you inspire those students? The second item you have to address is the development of your curricula. So what resources, what services have you developed that shows that you're really in command of your field? The third one is around assessment practices that bring about improvements to student learning. We've seen, given in the digital age, we've seen so much focus on plagiarism and cheating. So academic integrity is really important. So assessment practices that sort of improve academic integrity, but also use digital solutions. And then the last criteria is around innovation or leadership that has influenced or enhanced student learning or the student experience. So if you're going for a teaching award, you have to address all 4 of those criteria. If you're going for a citation, you address one of those criteria. So just to give you sort of the last 2 years, sort of a summary. So in 2019, we had 184 nominations and we awarded 84 of those nominations. In 2020, we had 170 nominations, so slightly less across these categories. And we awarded 74 awarded and plus 1 Career Achievement Award. I haven't mentioned the Career Achievement Award. It's a new type of award, and that's for someone that's had a significant impact on the sector over the lifetime of their career. And that's still continuing running, but I'm only selecting the sort of the more common awards in this presentation. And in 2021, we again had 184 nominations, and the number awarded is yet to be determined. So we award them at the start of 2022. So we still haven't got that. The assessors, the committees are just meeting. It's going to Universities Australia for approval. So we have a number of nominations, 180 submissions coming in, and we go through a pretty intensive assessment process. So first of all, we do an individual assessment. So we recruit around 150 to 200 assessors. All of the assessors are doing this voluntarily, so we don't pay them. In the past, we used to fly them to a venue and they would meet face to face. Now we're doing everything through MS Teams or on Zoom. And we've got a system that we are using, Spark Plus, that helps us manage all the submission processes. So everyone does their individual assessment and they have a rubric which they follow. Then what we do is we group the assessors into small teams, into teams of about 3 or 4 people, and they go through a collaborative assessment. And this is where they talk through the assessment, they can make changes, and then they make a recommendation to the awards committee. The awards committee is made up of DVC, so Deputy Vice Chancellors in Learning and Teaching or Education, very senior people in higher education. And then they endorse the recommendations from the assessment teams, and then they make a recommendation to the Universities Australia's Board of Directors, and then they give the final approval. All right, so in looking at the applicants and the submissions, we actually look to see whether the teachers are addressing the 21st century employability skills. So there's a paper by Michael Fullen and Jeff Scott. They wrote this paper in 2014, and they talk about the 21st century skills, employability skills. And I think they call them the 6 C's because everything starts with a C. And I think their 21st century employability skills still hold true today. So the first skill they talk about is character, that, you know, students need to be personally effective in a complex world. And they need to show perseverance, grit, tenacity, resilience, honesty, and reliability. The next one is around citizenship. So to think like global citizens, you know, consider global issues and develop deep understanding of others that might have diverse opinions and values. The third one is around collaboration. So that's the capacity to work interdependently, but also have strong interpersonal skills so you can work well in teams and groups. Communication is extremely important, and not just verbal communication and written communication, but also communication now in the digital world, and how you communicate with a variety of audiences is really important. And it's interesting to see creativity and critical thinking come up, because I know that's 2 key themes in this conference. So creativity is really important. And the way they define creativity is having that entrepreneurial eye and looking for economic and social opportunities. But it's about also asking those right questions to generate novel ideas and demonstrate leadership to pursue those ideas and put them into practice. And finally, critical thinking, and that's about evaluating information and arguments. You know, we see so much information around the pandemic, and you know, how do we evaluate what's the correct information, and do we see patterns, and do we see connections from, it might be graphs and charts, or the data that we're getting, and constructing meaningful knowledge and applying that in the real world. So they're the 21st century employability skills. And even though we haven't specifically asked the applicants to address these skills, a lot of the applicants refer to these in their application. And when you read the assessor's report, it's quite interesting to see how they talk about how the academic develops critical thinking, creativity, the students' communication. So I just wanted to talk through a couple of our past award recipients. So Jack Wang, you may have heard of him. He was the 2020 teacher. He got the Teacher of the Year award. So he got the Australian Award for University Teaching in the field of biological sciences, health. But he also got the overall award. And what he does is he challenges his students to become what he calls citizen scientists in the digital age. And what he does is he embeds disease outbreak scenarios into his teachings, and students have to discover sort of therapeutics against the global pandemic to create videos and podcasts to explain the original findings to the general public. And he also launched this Communication Ambassador program, and that's a nationwide initiative providing multimedia and communication training for early career scientists. And throughout his process, he gets the students to search for patterns in their data, to test their assumptions, and to construct arguments and present their findings in a meaningful way. And I'm just checking, Cassie, for time. Will I have time just to quickly show this 2-minute video?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share another screen. So I'm going to stop this sharing and I'm just going to share another screen. And this is a short video that Jack has prepared, and I'm just going to, I hope everyone can see that. And I'm just going to play it.
Microbiology encompasses the complex interplay between microscopic living organisms and their ever-changing environment over billions of years. There is so much richness, depth, and complexity in this field. So many stories that need to be captured and shared with the world. I have taught thousands of students of science over the past 10 years. I challenge all of them to become citizen scientists who can communicate scientific findings by distilling complex information down into bite-sized parcels for the digital age. I'm a strong advocate for students and early career scientists and have developed a national program that enables them to develop their science communication skills using social media. My students complete hands-on assessment tasks to develop transferable technical and communication skills. They learn how to produce, record, and edit podcasts, explaining the science to the general public. They complete laboratory obstacle courses featuring core hands-on techniques used in clinical diagnostics. They collaborate to research the latest global disease outbreak or pandemic and collectively present their findings to the class. I practice what I preach. I model best practice by communicating to my students in a variety of ways, through traditional lectures, interactive animations, and original videos featuring expert interviews, lab demonstrations, on-the-spot problem solving. This very video you're watching now, all of the footage, voiceovers, and animations, was shot, edited, and produced by me. These are the skills you need to communicate to audiences in the digital age, which will inevitably change over time. Embracing lifelong learning is the key, which is something I instill in all my students. My teaching practice embraces technology, and much like microbiology, the field I teach is constantly evolving and adapting. I'm always learning new skills in online communication and multimedia production, and am focused on reaching as many students as I can and mentoring the next generation of citizen scientists.
So I'll just stop that. You can see that was quite an impressive presentation by Jack, and I'm just going to go back to my presentation. So you can see Jack had a focus on preparing his students with the 21st century skills that they need. There was also, let me go back to the presentation. I hope you can all see the back. Can you see the presentation? Thanks, Cassie. In 2019, we had a team that got the National Teaching Award, and they actually did something quite interesting. They actually developed a course based around a crime drama that starts with a murder, and the students have to investigate the crime to find out who killed a particular person. And throughout the course, students take on different roles. They are either profilers in the first week, or they interview witnesses and suspects, or then they're part of a jury at the end. And the drama that they create provides a really engaging narrative context, and the assessment activities that students do are quite sort of challenging, but excite the students. And they also try to instill those 21st century skills. And there's a number of other ones, which I won't go through, but I've just put them here in case you want to look at them in your own time. There's another team that received a program award, and they looked at, they were the wildlife and conservation biology degree team, and they looked at producing highly employable conservation practitioners, and about 80% of their students had an international experience or an immersive field experience. So that's really, you know, bringing that experiential learning to life as well. There's a number of citation winners there, and you can see how when you read through this, and I won't go through them now, but they talk about how they foster critical thinking skills and those creativity skills in students. So to find out more, there's a couple of links there, and this presentation I imagine will be shared with all the participants. So feel free to have a look at any of those websites. All the grants and work that's been done by grant recipients or teaching fellows or award recipients are on a learning and teaching repository site. We have a profile booklet for all the National Teaching Award winners, which you can download so you can find out more about them. And then there's a couple of other links that take you to Universities Australia website. But feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to respond. Then finally, I just want to go through some of the government initiatives to support our educators. So the proposal is that we would like the government to continue to recognise academics for their sustained efforts in improving student learning via the award scheme. And we've tried to pressure the government to continue doing so. But the government, because of the pandemic as one of the reasons, is really looking at where do they allocate their funds, and is this the most pressing thing to allocate government money to? We would like the government to reintroduce learning and teaching fellowships. We had fellowships right up to 2018, and they allowed academics to work on a deep problem, a learning and teaching problem, for a year or two. And so that allowed academics to try new initiatives in different contexts, and gave them time off their teaching to do so. We also pressuring the government to support scholarship in learning and teaching. So, you know, so that academics can submit scholarly journals, learning and teaching papers into social journals, conferences, and attend events like these as well. And also to sponsor and encourage collaboration in the sector. But as I said, from 2021, or from 2022, so last year was the last year we got government funding, Universities Australia have now come together and are starting to source funding elsewhere. So there's a couple of possibilities. One is to seek external sponsorship from industry. I know Canada does that when it's sponsoring its 3M fellowships. The problem with getting sponsorship from industry is that the industry might take you in a direction that the universities might not want to go into. The other thing that we're looking at doing, and this is the actual method that we've adopted going forward, is to increase each university's subscription fee to Universities Australia. So there's 39 or 42 changes, public universities in Australia, and they all subscribe to Universities Australia. So by increasing that subscription fee, we can continue running the awards. We will also need to lower the award amount as well. And another option is to expand the scope. We've got currently a council for the Australian universities, learning and teaching leaders, and we could expand their scope. Their scope mainly is to provide professional development and update professional development across the country, but expand their scope to and increase the subscription fee, because most universities are subscribed to that group as well, to manage the awards as well. So really, that's all I wanted to share. Thank you for your time, and either take questions now or happy to take questions later.
Thanks, Angela, for that really engaging tour through the National Teaching Awards. I think that rather than pause for questions now, we'll perhaps wait till the end. But what I would like to do is turn to Aki, who's going to make some reflections on what we've heard. So Aki, please.
Okay, thank you very much. This is great. And is it okay that the Dr. Kim is now available? If you don't mind.
I am.
Okay, then I think that it's better to start with Dr. Kim. What do you think?
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's fine with me, and then you can make some reflections at the end. Okay, wonderful. All right, well, in that case, let me pass the floor to Yun Kim. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I almost had a heart attack because I was, somehow my connection was really bad, but now I'm in. Hopefully I do not have any problem, any further problem from now on. So you can see my slides, and I think I need to make it as a slideshow, right? Okay. Today I'm going to present about how Korean government, the policy efforts for education quality improvement and innovation at the university level. And in order to do that, I need to explain. And in order to do that, I chose 3 different funding projects. And why funding is that funding is a very important policy implementation measure. And I'm going to explain you some of the characteristics of Korean higher education policy measures since 1990s. So as I mentioned, implementation strategies have been mainly funding. In the past, I mean, before in 20th century or mid 20th centuries, a lot of education policies were focused on secondary or elementary education level. But as we expanded our education system in 90s, our society felt the necessity of having certain strategies regarding higher education. And that's when we started investing a lot of funding for higher education. And funding projects with specific policy objectives and target was one of the main characteristics of Korean higher education. So select and concentrate approach was the strategies. So because we did not have enough resources, we select and concentrate in that particular universities or in particular areas or particular policy objectives. And that's why university had to compete. So it's a competition based, and that means they pursue excellence. But these days, the number of beneficiary institutions have increased because of a lot of different policy concerns, and I'm going to explain you later. And quality management through evaluation. That means because it's a competition, in order to provide a certain amount of funding for the specific targets or specific policy objectives, they evaluate universities' performance, or sometimes they evaluate the university's plan. And that's why that's how they manage the quality of university performance. And since 1990s, before 2000s, research quality was the main policy concerns. Education was not main concerns for the funding projects or higher education policies, because we wanted to invest more for the research quality or technology. And because of the knowledge economy, knowledge became such an important component for economic growth of a nation. And that's why we invested more toward the research quality rather than education before 2000s. But because of the national growth has a lot of different meanings, and we paid more attention to the HRD, and we decided to pay more attention towards education and undergraduate education since 2010, and that's when we have a lot of funding projects for the education at the higher education level. And in that background, there are some changes in policy environment. So in the past, content knowledge was very important. And then content knowledge is seen as learning outcomes at the university level. But in the present or in the future, there are more emphasis on innovative technology and 21st century skills such as critical thinking, creativity, or communication skills. And those are much more important components for learning. And delivery system, regarding delivery system, standardized curricula and teaching was the was a trend of universities education. So instead of cooperative learning or learning together, that kind of concept was not the trend. Rather, it's a lecture from faculties to students was the widespread teaching methods. But these days, we pay more attention toward the more student-centered curricula, and individualized learning approach was emphasized as well. That means innovation is necessary within universities. And policy objectives is not that different. HRD for national economic growth, but these days, individual or community success or sustainability is also very important policy objectives in addition to the HRD for economic growth. To explain the government initiatives, I chose 3 different funding cases. And the very first one I chose was the Advancement for College Education. And this particular funding projects started around suggested around 2009. And then it started from 2012 up until 2018 or present. The purpose of the funding project was to improve quality for undergraduate education. And a lot of experts or researchers in higher education who study for higher education recognize this project as one of the most important projects that innovate or reform undergraduate education. And because of this project, concept of CTL, curriculum reform was introduced within higher education. And Korean Ministry of Education provide funding for selected universities and to educate teacher candidates with professional competencies and competency-based curricular reform of 2015. With ACE and the other projects I'm going to explain, I need to explain you about the curricular reform for the secondary schools and elementary schools in 2015. In the past, as I mentioned, the content knowledge was very important, but because of the curricular reform for school, we introduced the concept of competencies. So in the past, the 2015 curricular reform is very significant because it's a competency-based. And in order to teach that kind of curricula, teachers has to adapt themselves toward a new teaching methodology. And that's when they decided to invest a great amount of funding for university, in addition to all the undergraduate education, as well as the teacher candidates for the teacher educated programs as well. And to promote curriculum reform, innovative teaching and learning and student evaluation methodology needs to be changed. And that's why they decided to invest that kind of amount of money for the ACE, through this project. And related to that, leading teacher training university for creative teaching project is directly related to the teacher training program. And the background is the same, but they emphasize creativity a lot with a belief that the creative teachers would be able to, or would enhance, or would educate students their creativity and other 21st century skills. So Korean Ministry of Education provides funding for leading teacher training institutions. So this is a very specific targeted funding project. And 1 to 4 teacher training institutions are selected annually for two or 3 years, and to educate teacher candidates with professional competencies. And this is ACE. And I think there's some kind of, and then my other next cases. Okay. And then these are some specific funding before 2018 or 19. And since then, we combined some of the main funding projects into one. And changes in higher education policy concern is that increased governmental attention to college education and to restructure low quality universities and to provide better quality education, to emphasize competencies as learning outcomes, and to increase labor market relevance. These are some of the main proposed. The reason behind why we need to restructure or closing down the low quality universities, there's a great changes in our population. So in the past, if you see 1997, a little less than 20% of higher education attainment rate is Korea's statistical information by the statistical information. But if you see 2019, more than 40% of higher education attainment rates is between age 25 to 26 year old have their higher education degrees. And I believe this is only the 4-year college university, not the tertiary level. And if you see the high entry rate, the blue stick is the blue bar is the higher education attainment entry rate. And this is pretty significant. So up until 2020, we have more students rather than seats in universities. But because of low birth rate, now we have more seats in universities rather than the student candidates in higher universities. And in order to provide equal education opportunity, the Korean society focused on increasing number of universities rather than the quality. And there are some questionable universities who are suffering from securing enough number of universities to properly operate it. And sometimes some programs has a really questionable quality. So restructuring is very, very important. And at the same time, the reducing number of students quota in each university is also important. So the government, Korean government, decided to have improve the quality of higher education. And if the program doesn't get improved, then some programs has to reduce the number of students, and few universities closed down because of the evaluation. And from 2019, ACE plus, this is a second round of ACE ACE project, and CK, these 5 funding projects are combined into the University Innovation Assistant Project. So ACE is for the undergraduate education, and CK is for the specialization of university program. And PRIME emphasize the cooperation between industry sector and academics. And CORE is for the emphasis on promoting humanities studies, because we pay a lot of attention for the IT and technology or engineering or science, but we pay less attention for the less funding of projects available for the humanities. So this is a CORE. CORE is a project specifically for the humanities studies. And WEUP is for the female engineering experts. So these are all important undergraduate education programs, but they sometimes overlap. So government decided to combine these and then made one funding projects called University Innovation Assistant Project, and that's my third cases. So the characteristics of University Innovation Assistant Project is funding projects with specific targets. That's the past trend, but now combined, or they integrated projects of those 5 projects, and university evaluation for funding allocation. That means, I will explain you later for next slides, but still they need to evaluate the universities. And University Basic Competency Examination is the name of the evaluation program, and CADI is conducting that evaluation. And concerns for educational quality improvement is still there. So evaluation criteria consist with education indicators. So still for the 2019 proposed, all the important education indicators or the evaluation indicators are related to education, not the research, because government still maintain the funding for the research or the cooperation between industrial sector and education. So these are the specifically designed for the education. And promote institutional autonomy. So university plan their reform and we evaluate it based on their plans. And in between 2010 and now, most universities adopted competency-based curriculum, meaning every individual university has their own, we call it talented, certain talented that they need to equip when they graduate their universities. And they have a core competencies. And different university, although they emphasize a lot of 4 C's like critical thinking skills and creativity, communication skills, they develop their own components of core competencies. And in order to teach that, like secondary schools, faculty has to change. They need to, they retrained through their CTL or different programs, and university plan their reform, like curricular reform, and sometimes provide a lot of services for student learning or provide services, workshops toward the faculties. And that they prepare that kind of reform, and then they are evaluated based on their plans. And number of beneficiary institutions has increased. And in the past, in individual projects, only a handful, sometimes small number of universities receive funding. But because of the concern, then they all wanted to upgrade the university education quality, the number of beneficiary institutions increased a lot. And competitions within regions to ensure balanced regional development. In Korea, universities in Seoul metropolitan universities and the regional areas has a lot of gap. Most students want to study in the Seoul metropolitan area, and sometimes that widen the gap. So what they changed, what the government decided to do is, in order to have a balanced regional development, they divide into 5 regions. So they can compete within that regions instead of national level competition. And that's how I think I would say they added a little bit of equity issues within higher education funding projects. So characteristic, so provide funding for 3 years if they, and the number of institutions in A, I mean, the types of A is for the, we call it autonomous reform universities, meaning about 131 universities are considered to be type A. That means based on their university plan, innovation plan, they can conduct their plan. And then they do not have to reduce, they do not get any penalties, and they receive funding. And but type B, the 12 universities, or about 12 or sometimes 12, these are the university who are concerned needs to do a serious reform. So they need to reduce the total number of students, and they need to restructure, and they need to provide a plan for specialized programs. So they need to close down certain departments because their quality is not there. Sometimes they do not have enough number of full-time faculties, and their program is not good as we desirable as we recommend. So they need to plan for the specialized programs. So these are the, if universities are considered to be within this type B, that means they need to do their serious innovation. And these are the funding amount. So this is my final slides, but I wanted to show you some of the indicators for the evaluation criteria. So they are all related to the education. So conditions for education, meaning full-time faculty, how many full-time faculty do you have within university, and return rate of education expenses, how much money within the revenue, how much money do you return to for the education is considered to be important. And curricular improvement, general education and major education as well. And teaching learning improvement, what kind of faculty workshops and how did they improve their teaching learning improvement? They need to provide that kind of evidences. And the number of courses offered, how many options, how many courses do you offer for the students? And a student ratio for courses, how many students do you teach within courses, and the number of classes taught by part-time faculties, salary for part-time faculty, class management, and outcomes. And we all think that these are the very important components for the quality education within universities. And programs for student learning, for the student assistant area, programs for student learning, and programs for academic and psychological assistance. And these days, psychological assistance is very important, turned out to be very important for student success. So they are asked to have that kind of services for students, and programs for career assistance as well. And at education outcomes, student recruitment rate, employment rate, they are some of the major issues. And these are not only indicators because the total score is 100, but I think they are the important education indicators for the university competency examination. So these days, Korean society emphasized a lot for the student learning, undergraduate education, and through the funding projects, government implement or government push university toward that orientation. And thank you. That's all.
Thank you, In-Young, for that really interesting insight into how Korea seeks to influence the higher education system. We're going to have lots of time for questions, so please do keep your questions coming into the chat. I can see that there's already lots of exchange and questions happening. But before we move on to questions from the audience, let me turn to Aki to share some reflections on what we've heard so far. Aki, please.
Thank you very much. So let me share my screen. Just a moment, please. Does it work now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And I really enjoyed the two excellent presentations by Angela and Union. And especially, I'm really pleased to join this the meeting because I started my international career as a kind of the consultant of the OECD when I was 30 years old, sent by the Japanese government. And so that was really, really fascinating to come back to this OECD meeting, and especially for the congratulations for the 16th anniversary of the SRE. Thank you so much. And also I'm really pleased that especially Union, actually we met very long time ago, and when I was very, very young, and that really, really gives them one of the welcome out that the East Asia and Asia Pacific is now getting together. And by doing so, we are trying to develop the different types of the 21st century skill. And I do not make just a repeat of the similar types of the policy in Japan, but let me just give some framework for the developing the discussion for the reflection. I think that the two case of the cases of the Australia and the Korean one, of course, the perspective is different, but the Angela's presentation is basically on the highly bottom-up type the project. This means that the university Australia with the government and the industry possibly to support the very variety of the initiative of the individual teachers to promote and improve the quality teaching. So that is a really fascinating case, that how the government and the universities can support the individual initiatives. And also the Korean case is really interesting, that it seems to be very top down, or the government driven the approach. But having said so, that if you go to the very detail, that it is also true that actually the university autonomy and the initiative from the bottom up is also highly welcomed. And in the end, the individual learners are really the key person, key actor to understand this kind of initiative. And this is a very traditional framework. Maybe everybody knows that this is based on a Barton Clark's great work of the academic system. So the higher education world is basically coordinated by the three main actors. One is the government or the state, and the other one is the market. Sometimes this is a student, but in the 21st century context, that the knowledge economy means that the business world itself is a kind of market of the university. And also the academics has their own value. And this is really we are always thinking about the meaning of that. They take a case of for example, the creative thinking. I am trained as a sociologist, so that if I go to the academic world, I can be very critical, if you like. But it is not really welcomed in if I go to the kind of governmental the meeting, including the OECD one. I'm becoming a relatively well-behaved creative thinking, creative and critical. And the market, the critical thinking and the creativity means some kind of the platform or the context of the business world. So that's again quite different with the what does it mean in the governmental public space, and also at the university, as you could see. And when we make a kind of the policy initiative, and also the university management, or the try to support the individual learners or the individual instructors, we need to think about some the diagram of what we are, what kind of values are shared among the different stakeholders. And basically that I am also belonging to the university, so what we are trying to develop some initiative of the 21st century skill type education. Still, we have some the very strong idea of the value traditionally inherited from among the of the university academics, or some. For example, University of Applied Science or the Polytechnic has, or the TAFE have a different idea, but basically that the instructors, educator has their own value. And sometimes we have more strong external the demand and expectation to the education reform or the skill development, sometimes government and sometimes employers. And in case of the Australia, that the 21st century skill Angela mentioned is that the 21st century employability skill, right? And also especially for the Asia Pacific, especially I'm belong to the so-called East Asia, like China, Korea, or Japan, have a very strong national context and local context, right? So then it is really true that we are trying to develop the global common goals, like a global citizenship, or the in Japanese case that we really stress that the global human resources mean that the people who can work actively in the global business world, the global society. But at the same time, we try to put importance on the national context, so that especially when we discuss a discussion about the internationalization, the global human resources, we always think about what we need to protect and develop the national identity. And that is the things we are thinking about. So this means that the 21st century skill education can be different in a different country or different society. That is one of the way of understanding. So under this context, we are now in the process of the new age, partly because of COVID-19 pandemic, but also for the because of that the digitalization really worked. The transformation to the digitalization is now becoming more the speedy and the dynamic. And actually, I have never imagined that I can make a this kind of discussion with more than almost 300 people today, or through online like today, right? Based on my own campus. So now the digital, the real world and virtual world is now seamless. We are now sharing the same the cyberspace. And also the divide and inclusion has a quite different meaning now. So for example, if I want to give some international experience before the pandemic, it was really costly. That we just imagine that we have to send our student to for example, the Paris or the whatever, and then that gives the international experiences. But now, I think theoretically it's possible if everybody is connected to the internet. Of course, there are many the people who are not connected yet, but that we can provide all of the students the international experiences from tomorrow or today, right? So this is really big the differences. And finally, what is the meaning of the skills and the human resources? And sometimes it is, of course, individualized, or decided by the individual needs. But at the same time, always the systems are kind of trying to define it. And also that we need to think about some communities. Sometimes this means that the academic community or non-governmental social community, or the student learners also can develop their own community, sometimes face-to-face, sometimes the cyber world. So anyway, that by doing so, I think that this is a very interesting time. But we should develop some kind of quality ecosystem, or the ecosystem of the quality education that can satisfy as much as the diversity of the people, and also try to connect everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aki. That was a really useful reminder of the changing kind of context of higher education and the need to think holistically, nationally and transnationally about higher education as an ecosystem, and how we can connect approaches in different places. So we've had lots of engagement and discussion going on in the chat, and we've now had a chance to hear about these two different system approaches, and then some thoughts on the broader context. So we're going to move on to the question and answer session, and we will do our best to cover all of the issues that are raised. We may miss some of them, but we'll try our best. Before we move on to the audience questions, I have a question myself, and that's what happens after? So what happens after, for example, a teacher receives an award? Do you have do you collect evidence of the effect of that award? How does that affect their teaching, their career prospects, etc.? And then equally, what happens after institutions receive funding? Do you have kind of tracking for what they do with that funding, and the impact of that funding? So maybe first to Angela and then to Eun-Young.
Yeah, so we do. When money is issued to the applicant, it's usually issued to the institution for the applicant, and then they have to describe how they're going to use the funding and say how they've spent the funding, and the funding has to be used to improve student learning. So I know when I got my award back in 1998, it's a long time ago, but I remember using my funding for some equipment, digital cameras. Now no one uses digital cameras. Everyone's got a camera on their iPhone, and multimedia equipment to get my students working in developing. At that stage, we were developing web pages. So yes, so there is accountability for how you use the money. And so what was the first question? You said the first question. Can you just repeat that?
And do you collect any kind of evidence on the impact of?
Yes, we do. So for all the university teachers of the year, we interviewed them years after they got their awards to say what was the impact of their award and how has it helped their career progression, or what has it allowed them to do. So there's a booklet we've captured from 1997 when the first award was issued through to 2 years ago, because we do it every 2 years, giving you a sense of the progression, what the award has meant, what opportunities have been available to the academics, and what they've done with those opportunities. And a lot of people that get the teaching awards end up going down a route where they're looking at education policy, or they're leaders in learning and teaching, or they're running a centre. It might be around digital education, or it might be some other types of centre. So we've got that captured, and people can download that off one of the links that I provided.
Great, thank you. And Young, what happens after an institution receives funding?
I need to verify for the third project, but I'm pretty sure what happened, it would be the same with what happened with other funding projects. Usually when the government provides certain amount of funding, sometimes they do a midterm evaluation, and university has to write the report about their performances, whether they kept the promises. And if they haven't met the plan, or a certain amount of objectives the progress they wanted to make, then they need to explain it. And they are evaluated both quantitatively and qualitatively as well. So it's a huge process, but most funding projects that I participated in the evaluation has that kind of approach. They maintain that kind of approaches. Sometimes they include a midterm, sometimes they don't, but they need to university provide the reports. And they also need to put we have an open information system. So a lot of information regarding student entry rate, the number of students, the faculty, full-time faculty, and those things should be uploaded within the national system that we call it a university information open system, something like that. So they need to be re-evaluated with their performances.
Great.
They're not really happy.
Thank you. We've got a number of questions in the chat around sort of criteria issues. And I know that we heard yesterday in our session that sometimes programs to provide funding, government funding, sometimes the evaluation criteria for those programs maybe aren't as helpful as they could be to the development of 21st century skills, or they're not as flexible as they could be, or they're not kind of updated. So I just wondered, first of all, and Young, how you go about developing those criteria, and whether they're reviewed regularly, and how you kind of make sure that they are kind of relevant and responsive to the sorts of teaching that might be conducive to 21st century skills.
Okay. The project that I need to explain about, the project that I'm going to conduct this year, is for the competency-based curriculum within university level. That's going to be my research for this year. I think around 2015, I think most university adopted competency-based program, but I think whether it has been successfully operated, it's another level of question. And the reason behind that kind of certain challenges are still needs to be addressed is because competency-based curriculum is still a new thing. And a lot of faculties and students are more accustomed to the traditional way of learning. And I learned that while I was conducting the project of OECD project, Critical Thinking and Creativity. And I discussed a lot with the faculties and through the semesters, and a lot of issues are entangled. So it's a lot of different issues, and that's why I decided to conduct that research to see more of a national, the policy level, how can we improve that? That you asked me about how we can push toward the competency. And I think one of the reason we really do not have a clear ideas about competency-based curriculum within university is one of the main reasons is how we don't know how to evaluate and how to utilize the evaluation program. I mean, I'm not talking about university evaluation, it's more of a student evaluation. And sometimes learning outcome is a little bit unclear, and we need to improve, we need to address that issue. And because it's a top-down approaches of policy implementation, sometimes the shared recognition of the importance of the competency-based curriculum or competency-based program is not there. So sometimes it's rhetorics. Every faculty has to address in their syllabus that in my courses, I'm going to make my students, I'm going to emphasize certain competencies within my courses through this semester. They need to indicate that, but that's only the quantitative assessment of the faculties for their courses. But whether they actually deliver it, it's another issue. And we don't have any clear idea. And that's one of the objectives that I want to study for this year. So although the funding is not enough, I think the motivation and the shared recognition among the faculties is very important. And I found that through while I was participating in OECD's project. And I still don't know how can we make that happen yet.
Okay, maybe we can discuss that further. Just a quick follow-up question before I turn to Angela. We had a question in the chat about whether the funding criteria reflects student satisfaction and support for students. So I just wanted to put that to you. You know, what role does student satisfaction and student voice play in the development of the criteria for funding?
Okay, so one of the trendy, or not the trendy, but one of the practices that we these days adopt is to include whether students are satisfied with the program, quality of the program, or whether that's really meet their needs. And through the survey, every course has to be evaluated. I'm sure a lot of universities has that kind of practice. And if they participate in certain student learning services or any kind of program, they usually conduct a survey. And that's the way that sometimes they provide a number of satisfactory level, the rate or the score in the report. But at the same time, sometimes they include the narratives, because student satisfaction is an important indicator for the quality of the programs. But there are lots of concerns, include considering those student satisfactory level in the evaluation criteria. But sometimes that is also, but we do not have many criteria, ways of understanding the quality of the program. And that's why we include the satisfaction level. But we try to assess or evaluate the qualitative side of the program or the university performances. I hope I answered that question.
You did, thank you. So let's turn to Angela, but staying on this kind of question of criteria, can you tell us a little bit about sort of development of the criteria that you use to recognize teaching? And particularly we had a question in the chat about whether there's room to recognize kind of the progression of teachers rather than just excellence in a given moment.
Yeah, so a teaching award is usually granted for sustained or improved teaching. And so what do we mean by sustained or improved? So it's not just you try one thing and then all of a sudden you could use your student satisfaction scores. You know, they were, we have a Likert scale of 1 to 5 when students rate the quality that they rate the overall satisfaction of their course or their unit or their subject, depending on what you call it. So, you know, there could be a teacher that makes a change and student satisfaction is very low and then it moves to very high. We want to know not that there's been a change, but that change is continuing to improve. And what's the story behind that change? So what are the qualitative, what are the things that happened? And we want multiple sources of evidence. And so it's just not one source. It can't just be the student satisfaction score, but it could be a peer that's come in and looked at it. It could be something else that you might be using with industry partners, or it might be something else. And we want multiple sources of evidence. So that evaluation. The other thing, we have programs, which is like a degree, and the program's made up of courses. That's the nomenclature we use at RMIT. So a program has a set of program learning outcomes. Now, universities in Australia used to have what they called graduate attributes. So if a student went to RMIT, we would expect them to be great communicators, to know how to work in a digital world, to have multiple perspectives of like the Indigenous perspectives, but also global perspectives. So there's a number of what we call the graduate attributes, and every university has their own. But when you look across most universities, like they try to make them, you know, distinguish, so you can distinguish one university from another. But we can see most of them have things like great communication, you know, ethically global citizens, you know, can work in a digital age, are good collaborators, teamwork. So pretty much encompassing the 6 C's that I mentioned in Michael Fullan's and Jeff Scott's work. But they nuance them. So every university wants to be different, right? They don't want to all have the same. Otherwise, what's the point in having, you know, we've got 42 public universities. What's the point in having 40 if they're all going to come out with the same sort of graduate? So they try to nuance it. So those graduate attributes need to be reflected in the program learning outcomes, right? And then the program's made up of a number of courses, and the courses have course learning outcomes. Now, usually an academic is teaching a course, and what they talk about is the improvements or how they are working with their students to develop their 21st century skills, which align to their program and align to the university's graduate attributes, yeah, and align to nationally the type of, you know, employability skills we want in our graduates, yeah. So for an academic applying for an award, they have to show that their performance is sustained, that they have a narrative, and they have, you know, a reason for the change and different sorts of evidence to show that that change has been effective. And they've got to embed it in the research. So what is the pedagogical philosophy that they're using, and what is it based on, and who has used those practices before, and what has been achieved? So it's quite full on. We always review our assessment criteria. Every year, we get the assessors together and we say, what was missing, what worked, what do we need to improve? So the assessment criteria is refined year after year. Yeah, and that's all. The only other thing I wanted to mention was when you were talking about government funding to universities. So in Australia, we have a number of indicators that the government sets for us. So, you know, we have the overall student satisfaction. There's a national survey that goes round. We have a good teaching score. So, you know, each university knows, you know, their good teaching score for different disciplines. We look at students, whether they're employed after they finish their degree, so the employability score. There's a number of indicators. Now, at the moment, the Australian government doesn't fund universities on those indicators, but it may move in that direction. So it's really important that universities perform well in those indicators. And so the universities keep a very critical eye on where they're positioned amongst the other universities. So if they're not doing well in an indicator, it's really important that they improve, because the government may bring in reforms where your funding might be linked to those indicators. It's not at the moment, but it could be.
Okay, thank you. There were several things that stood out for me from what you were saying. One of them was that importance of kind of recognizing the diversity of institutions. That's something that we also heard yesterday. I just want to ask one more quick follow-up question on the sort of practicalities of the programs, and then we can kind of move on and talk about the broader kind of system level. But one thing that we often hear from our network of institutions that we work with is that sometimes the sorts of policy initiatives that might support 21st century skills can end up kind of presenting quite an administrative burden to faculty, to departments, to institutions, and that actually, you know, rather than encouraging kind of the development of 21st century skills, can actually constrain it and distract from it, because people are so busy filling in kind of forms and applications. And so I just wondered if you had any kind of mechanisms to deal with that, to make sure that it doesn't become too much of an administrative burden. So maybe first of all to Young and then to Angela.
Please tell us if you have any answers to that question. I think I gave you the picture from the government perspective, because we're not under government, under the Korean government, but still we're not universities. But I know a lot of faculties within universities mention about that burden. They really suffer from writing the report or writing a plan. I don't think there's any good way to satisfy the policy people in the policy sector and people in the university. But I think there's some room, and that's why they emphasize autonomous plan a lot. I don't know whether faculties would believe in that autonomy of institutional autonomy while they are being evaluated. But one of the measures that is the indicators that you asked questions earlier, that indicators are developed through the communication with the experts from the universities, faculties, and experts from the researchers and government experts as well, the government officers as well. And that's one way that they can provide more room toward the universities. And one of the reason I believe they combine those 5 projects for the college education is I think to reduce the amount of burden, because they don't have to write up the all different reports or the plan for their innovation. But I don't think I have any clear answer, and if there's any government or any society has answer for that, I'm sure Korea will love to learn from that.
Thank you. Yeah. Angela, if you have any very brief thoughts?
Yeah, so I just wanted to,
we'll
yeah. So last year, the Australian government introduced National Priority Industry Linkage Fund. And what it was trying to do, it was trying to make universities connect better with industry and produce graduates that could then go and serve industry. And what they did was they said, right, and for a university the size of RMIT, which has, you know, like 100,000 students, that's a big university, it was giving RMIT $10 million. So universities that were over a certain size, you know, 10, and that's a significant amount. That's not, you know, it's not peanuts. It's quite significant. And what they said is, right, we want you, we're going to give you these $10 million, but we want to make sure that all your students are trained in STEM areas. We want to make sure all your students have WIL experiences, so work integrated learning experiences, and that's defined in a number of ways. It doesn't just mean a placement or internship. And there was some, and all your courses, or a certain number of courses, are co-designed with industry. And the government didn't say, this is how we're going to evaluate you. The government said to us, you tell us how you would like to be evaluated, and what would you set your targets for 2022, 2023, and 2024, so over the 3 years. So the government didn't say, we're going to measure this, this, and this. They said, we're going to give you this money. We want to see some changes. How are you going to measure those changes? So they've given it back to the universities to figure out. So we've come up with a proposal, and yeah, so that's what we're doing.
Please.
So in Korea, a lot of funding projects, they have different layers of indicators. So common indicators that apply for all the universities, and then autonomous indicators that university bring their objectives in certain areas, and they are evaluated with the indicators they suggested for the evaluators. That's the combination that we use a lot for the university evaluation.
Interesting. Thank you both. Interesting discussions about this kind of finding this balance between autonomy and involvement in the development of indicators, but also kind of guidance and giving enough time, you know, not imposing too much administrative burden. I want to kind of take a step back because we only have a few minutes, and I want to bring Aki in again. We had one question in the chat about how we can kind of backwards plan this into secondary education, and that kind of made me think about sort of these more systemic kind of approaches. And so I wondered if, just to finish, you had any thoughts on how we can kind of join up these kinds of initiatives so that they work together to support 21st century skills, whether it be from kind of school level to higher education level, or whether it be across institutions. And I wondered, maybe Aki, you wanted to start thinking about what sorts, you know, how to join up some of these initiatives, and whether you have any examples of more joined up kind of thinking.
Thank you very much. This is really, really interesting. And so before that, let me just say that one of the possibility of the kind of administrative burden would be just a dream, but to utilize the learning management system. And of course, there are possibility that the learning management system may make another types of burden, but anyway, that is one of the way for the future. But let me go back to that question. What we experienced like last 10 years in Japan, and possibly most of the Pacific countries, including Southeast Asia, is that we have a very strong national curriculum in a second education, right. And we have an examination. Most of the cases that based on this common national curriculum. So this means that the second education is more nationalized, and then we will face with the obstacle that if you go graduate the university or the higher education institution, you are going to the very globalized business world. Or if you go to the graduate school, everything is really, really international. So then the undergraduate education are actually utilized as a kind of the platform to transform yourself from the national perspective to the international perspective. That was the traditional pattern. But now the individualization of the learning is going more rapidly, partly because of digitalization and also the aging also does matter. So then you can start university education before entering the university. It is quite common, for example, in Australia, for the secondary education. Students go to the university to get some credit, and we are also studying that. And also now, of course, you can, utilize the micro credentials to continue and to casualize the learning process to mingle with the other life, like the enjoy your life or the working or everything. So by doing so, we are now changing, and also this kind of the movement somehow to make the good incentive for us to work between the secondary education and the tertiary education. But one of the kind of concern or one of the possibility also is that there are much more internationalized secondary education is now increasing a lot, especially for the people who has resources, like people who are going to the international baccalaureate program. That is really another story.
Maybe.
So how can we understand the kind of inclusiveness or diversity or the equality? That would be the new phase we are facing with. Sorry. Okay.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And so I'll just turn for very brief, like 20-second reflection on how can we create more joined up approaches to the development of 21st century skills in the Asia Pacific. First of all, Young, and then Angela. As brief as you can.
That's a difficult
Maybe, Angela,
question.
you might want to go first.
No, I'm hoping to say ditto, whatever Young says. How do we create more? So repeat the question. How do we create more
joined up approaches to the development of 21st century skills at the system level?
Look, I think, in Australia, there's the government we have a national curriculum too for our secondary education, and universities have got their own. And I feel like there's a bit of a disjoint there. We've got to get the right groups connecting. We've got to get the groups that represent the universities and the groups that represent the secondary school, and we've got to get a better connection. I think, working out who to speak to is a critical thing, and that is really a job for the government. And I think the universities are a bit dependent on the government in terms of funding they give for numbers of students and for research. But they've got no control over what the universities sort of teach. We've got the tertiary education quality agency, so it's called TEXA, and they look at the quality and the standard of the programs that we deliver in the tertiary education system. But there's no communication with the secondary school system. So look, that's a really difficult question, and I don't have an answer for it, but I will think about it.
So more communication and more knowledge of the system. I think I may spare you and Young, if that's okay, because I see that we are very much out of time.
Thank
but
you.
That's a question for us all to think about, is how we kind of move beyond individual approaches to a more joined up approach. So that just leaves me with the task of thanking you all for a really great panel, a really great discussion. Although this is the kind of final public discussion of this, we will continue these discussions with our project network and with OECD delegates. I think that these models that we've talked about today around teaching awards and funding, if done right, can be really interesting initiatives that kind of both respect autonomy of institutions and also have some influence over the direction of institutions. So thank you very much. The recording of this webinar will be available on the Edu YouTube channel. Thank you to the audience for being here. And with that, I'd like to close the webinar. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Cassie. Thank you, Unyung, and thank you, Aki.
Bye,
Lovely to
Cassie.
meet you all.
Bye,
And,
Aki.
Thank you. No.
Bye.
brilliantly moderated, Cassie.
Till next
Bye,
time. Yeah.
Angela.
Bye.